Welcome, Freedom Fighters 1776, the podcast. I'm your host, Mark Bashaw, and I've got an outstanding show with an outstanding guest today. We're going to be talking about Natural Law Institute with the president of the Institute, Brandon Hayes. It's going to be a good show, folks. Before I get to that, I want to just give a little background on the Institute. I think they do a lot more than this, but this is kind of just a general background. An independent academic organization that performs research in human cognition, human behavior, human cooperation, and development of constitutions, legislation, social and economic policy. A little background of the Institute. But before we get to our guest, I want to highlight this clip of Brandon Hayes and give a little bit context before I bring in this clip. Brandon, he's going to go into the professions, but one of his professional backgrounds was as a wrestling coach, a high school wrestling coach. And so this clip is back at the height of the pandemic. I think it was September 2020, when things were just completely belligerent and tyrannical. Well, let me rewind. I guess it didn't completely get belligerent until January of 2021, but y'all were there, y'all felt it, y'all saw it, and so it was kind of the height of the pandemic, right before the weaponized mandate started. But his high school was acting crazy at this time, and this is an example of an irreciprocity, and this is an example of how to equilibrate that with swiftness and tact, and you're going to see that right now. So let me bring that on, and then we'll bring on our guest.
Because it's been an incredible waste of time and overreach of administrative power. So I don't know what to do with you guys, because this is ridiculous. It's beyond belief almost. You hardly pay me $3,000 a year. It's not even minimum wage when you break out the hours. It's hilarious. And you spent hours on it, and they've spent dozens of emails on it, and everything's super clear. So I'm unsure what your play is.
I just told you. As I said in the letter, it's my intention to move forward with the termination after review with counsel if you refuse to meet with your supervisor, as I would anyone else.
Okay. I, again, still need an employee handbook, which I never got. Still need the code of ethics between employees at Triton, which I've never got, which you claim that I go against, even though I was bullied first, etc. and so on. Do your due diligence. Send me the proper letters. Actually be clear instead of insanely ambiguous, and tie it to something that has to do with my performance as a wrestling coach. And we're game.
Not terminating you for having anything to do with your performance as a wrestling coach. That's not included here at all. It has nothing to do with anything you've done or haven't done.
It's for my free speech, because that's what Tim said the meeting was about both times, which means you've only circumvented the ability to keep me as an employee by saying I've been insubordinate, instead of firing your administration, who overstepped the scope of their job and their overseeing of what I do with my time. So yes, it was underhanded. It's slippery.
Again, we'll agree to disagree. So
well, why would you agree that you're being slippery? That wouldn't do you much good.
So I'm going to wrap this up. So am I hearing you say that you are willing to meet with Tim and Patrick?
As long as I outline the meeting and I can bring representation and I don't have to wear a mask.
Good. I can't do in person without a mask. But
I'll meet them on Zoom without recorded with representation in the room. I have a newborn child. People who wear masks are sick. So I haven't been sick. I don't want to be around people who think they need to wear a mask. That's reasonable.
There's probably people who are wearing masks who may believe the same thing, but our policy requires them. So that's where we're at.
Okay. We can have a Zoom call that's not recorded when I have representation, once they outline the meeting, and once they outline the scope of the meeting. It's no problem, but that wasn't done.
All right. So then I will be in touch with you then.
Wonderful.
All right.
Have a great day.
Brandon Hayes, everybody. Welcome to the podcast. Natural Law Institute president. Appreciate that. Appreciate you coming on. Thanks for being here. If you could give the audience a bit of a background on your experiences, your profession, and maybe a little bit more context to that clip we just saw of defying this superintendent, tyrannical superintendent that didn't want to stand with you, instead wanted to try to censor you and ultimately eliminate you from your position.
Let me see if I can tie all the threads together for you. At about the time the behavior the administration found questionable was happening, it was probably 2019 and 2020. And I was taking part in what we called King of the Hill games that we played across social media, but mostly on Facebook, where we would air contentious argumentation and have people bear out their positions in demonstrated interests as part of how we practice social science. So we agitate people and then watch what they defend. Because you can ask people what they believe or what they believe in, but they will lie to you in order to get what they want, or they'll virtue signal because they're in the public square or whatnot. But when you attack what they love and they defend it, it's something that's not disputable. We call it a demonstrated interest. So we get people to demonstrate interest in the things that are at the edges of their cognition. This forces biases to the forefront and affords us to examine them from all positions. So I was being probably frequently reported to my own administration for doing what I was doing online, because I did it in a local context. Meaning I was the admin of some local news groups that were tied, directly to local people, and we live in a small area. So I upset plenty of parents who send children to a school that I was employed at. That is the reason for the administrative pressure to emerge in the first place. Now, as I said in the meeting, this is all lawful, meaning I was doing it on my own time, and I wasn't doing it as a representative of the school. I was just known as the coach. So people pointed me out and brought me up to the administration. So they were looking for a reason to fire me. But in order to fire someone from a profession, they have to do something that is opposed to the standards put forth by the organization that you are a part of which mine was a public one, a public school. So they have to abide by all the laws constitutionally here, and they were not. Their administration asked me underhandedly to remove particular posts and association to the wrestling team so that they didn't catch any more heat. And I told them no, because that's outside of the bounds of his, what would you call it, professional ability to request me to do, meaning he was asking me a favor as a friend, and we are not friends. We are professional workers, and we work in a professional fashion with one another. And I only answer to administration and matters regarding children and their health and safety.
Right. It seems to me like, yeah, I mean, you're the wrestling coach, and they were going completely out their way with a target on your back because of what you were saying in your private personal.
This is a classic example of someone who's low on the totem pole being picked on by administration and bureaucracy. It happens all the time. It's not it's super common, and most of the bureaucrats and administration engaging in these tactics ought to be purged, meaning AI does their job better, and they're only abusing their position of power to maintain their, what would you call it, their salaries and so on.
Well, you're right. It does happen all the time. But one of the interesting things about this is who I got to ask you this: who allowed for this to be recorded? And then, I mean, he is a public servant. He's the superintendent of the school, so he agreed to these recordings, because there's one at the end of this episode. I'll let the audience watch, of when you were getting fired for refusing to muzzle your athletes, your wrestling athletes, muzzle them with the experimental masking. And so I'll show that at the end. But like, who did he agreed to this? He allowed this, these events to be recorded, so we could look at these.
In my defense as a strategic meta player here, and we can discuss what that looks like as we delve into the Institute. There were dozens, if not over 100 emails that went back and forth between me and the subordinates to the superintendent. What would you call it? It's the
sports person.
Oh, the athletics director.
Athletic director. So there were back and forth between me and the athletic director, including calls that were not recorded. They just called my cell phone that they had on file, which I advise people as someone who deals in this milieu all the time to get everything in writing between you and administration or bureaucracy. Don't have calls with them unless it is recorded. So I requested that all interaction between me and any higher ups, once I got to the president, be recorded on Zoom. I took advantage of the COVID restrictions and told them that was my preference. Massachusetts is actually a non-recording state. Like you have to you have to tell the parties. Yeah, you have to tell the parties, and they can decline. Which at that point, after having Zoom meetings, they were wise enough to decline moving forward.
Well, it was too late at that point because you got some material out of there, and it, like you said, it's two-party consent. So he consented to this, and furthermore, besides the fact that your redress of grievances through the system written down, you know, he's a public servant, and he's going way outside the bounds. These individuals love to stand on their administrative rules and regulations. But in the process of doing that, they're violating the most basic, fundamental natural laws, but our Constitution as well. And they think that trumps the Constitution, that trumps natural law. And what will become more and more clear as we go on is that is absolutely not the case. And instead, it's complete tyranny.
Mm-hmm. This is the environment that these people swim in. Like the conservatives would call it the swamp. It's just deeper and wider than people would like to admit. I mean, that's low-level administration at a small public school outside of Boston. That man isn't fit to have serious conversations with his own employee. Meaning he demonstrated his unfitness to be savvy in the position he's in, and that's on top of that's on top of giving in to all the COVID demands which told him to abuse the kids in his steward, which he did happily.
Well, yeah, I mean, you highlighted complete irreciprocity here, like complete irreciprocity. You were trying to equilibrate it and bring him to where he needed to be to work alongside you. And instead, they took the path at the time of least resistance, which was destroy you. And I can definitely, relate with that because of my own situation with being in the military and having these leadership.
A much more egregious situation than mine, as far as I can tell.
But it's all there is, and I say this to my buddies, and I've probably said it to you too. There was no difference between a military service member or a school teacher or a wrestling coach in this case. The past 4 years, we were all in the same boat. You either did the right thing, you acted justly and truthful, or you blindly went along, or worse than that, you went along and then targeted those were giving you protected communication, the laws, to do the right thing, like you were doing in this case. And what we'll see at the very end, where the superintendent just stares at you. He can't equilibrate to your level because deep down inside he knows he's wrong, and his best course of action is just to stare at you with a glazed look. Anyway, Brendan, give us a little bit of your background, your experiences, your professions, and then I want to jump into another clip highlighting the foundation and some of the work you're doing over there.
You and I are part of the same cultural locality. We grew up in the same part of the world. My people are 3 or 4 generations American. My mother's father was an entrepreneur. My father was an entrepreneur. I am an entrepreneur. I only worked that job at the high school because it's the closest high school. I wrestled at that high school, and I was given the job after many years of volunteer. Meaning they just decided to pay me as the assistant coach because I was showing up anyway, and doing most of the role because I enjoyed it.
Right.
in my youth, I worked mostly with dogs. I was a behaviorist, and I did fine point tuning for dogs that entered into competition, mostly Schutzhund, which is a protection dog sport, where a dog bites the guy with the arm.
Right.
They do tracking, obedience, and protection. I ran a dog training company. I bred German Shepherds, and I dealt with behavioral cases that were on the edge. So I was the guy that you called if someone told you need to put your dog down. I networked with local animal control and so on and so forth. I put myself in harm's way probably too much in my teens and 20s dealing with the animals that I dealt with. But I buried myself in that field because the real world presented with too much performative contradiction for me. I was dealt with my family, and we were entrepreneurs, so your word was your bond. But everybody who worked in the institutionalized world that had to do with school or college or so on, they could never be held to their word.
Right. Good deal. No,
yeah, please.
I do. I want to jump into this clip, and then you feel free to give more of the background. Also, for the audience, Brandon and I grew up, like he said, in the same area. We went to the same high school. My brother wrestled with him on the wrestling team. We were very familiar with each other. We recently reconnected when I found out he was a freedom fighter standing up against tyrants at this school, and he learned about my situation in the military, and we connected that way as well. But like you're saying, a generational family in that area. My generational family, 12th generation American, goes back to the foundational Newbury, Massachusetts, 1620. So a little bit more context for the audience. Let me jump into this clip real quick, and we'll dive right more into the Natural Law Institute.
Most importantly, we're going to teach you how to win this war. We're going to teach you how to recognize irreciprocities. We'll teach you to equilibrate those irreciprocities with swiftness and tact. And almost as importantly, we're going to teach you what to do after winning. Let's codify, strictly construct your law so that your traditions, norms, families, and genetics can't be undermined or subverted in the future. Reality is deterministic, not determined. We teach the science of decidability. You have choice. The accumulation of those choices through time, that is a representation of your will. That is a representation of the people's will, if it's a collective. You choose whether that will is good or not. You choose. We posit that you ought to choose the just and narrow path, because the only way to is through.
I want to ask, and give more context on the Natural Law Institute. Who's over there? How'd it come about? How'd you become president? And then given today's reality in which we find ourselves in, what is the just way? What does that look like from your perspective?
All right, let me tie back into behavioral science. I learned more about human behavior, working with dogs, than I did working with humans before. After I worked with dogs and integrated that understanding about root behavior, biases, and aggression, because I worked with dogs on the edge. So I made dogs aggressive or not, right, purposefully, fine-tuning animals to respond in a particular way. When I moved back into real world space, what I was constantly bombarded with were people saying things and doing something discordant with what they were saying. And there's no place that manifests more, would you say it, starkly than in the highest levels of interplay between peoples. I was searching for a way to explain to people that most of the problems we suffer here in our global hegemony, the homogenization of everything, are problems of proximity. We've poorly constructed doggy daycares globally, and we source them with entertainment, and the dogs get rowdy too often. And in the human world, when the dogs get rowdy, they request more authority to suppress the rowdiness of the crew. Right? And that's happening across the globe, and we're beckoning in the authority. And what we're not realizing is it's because we're children that we're asking for the authority. What we should be doing is growing up and assuming the authority ourselves. And anybody who's not doing that is not fit for participatory governance, because they are not fit for governing or being part of those who govern. So the Institute, we teach a step function advance in social sciences, replacing all of the pseudosciences taught at colleges across the globe. Right? Psychology, sociology, and so on. These are pseudosciences. They're filled with lies. They're propositioned on axioms about humanity that are incorrect, which means all the conclusions derived are inverted. And it's the reason we think we can continue this experiment in hurting people, hurting and hurting them in the way that we're doing so.
And would you say we're at a tipping point, a boiling point of this authoritative state, to where people are starting to get slapped in the face with the reality of it and having to take the responsibility in their own hands of some sort of, educating themselves, because the traditional societal institutions are doing it?
The saturation of the corruption is total. And you can use my personal anecdote as an example of it, because like I said, it's a small town place. The people are close here. This is not, I did something and what I did was stand on the founding principles of this country. And I was fired from contact with children and a job that I loved, that I did because I liked it. And it counted as my fitness, meaning it was my 90 days of fitness. So they actually burned my fitness period too by getting fired. But that's all besides the point. I did it because I liked it. I served the people here. I served the communities here. I did it for years and years. And the system was willing to burn me and all the capital that I put in, all the investment that I put in here. But they were willing to burn that on an unprincipled technicality, on their ability to abuse the children and wedge their authority in a way that pushed the goodness out. So go ahead.
What do you think happens from this point? What does this look like? From my own perspective, I can't possibly entertain putting my children in public school. Right now I homeschool. And your video and your those counseling sessions that you were going through with this public servant getting fired, all that stuff highlights the fact that I won't subject my kids to this if these public servants can't even recognize the most basic fundamentals of natural law, where they're allowing children to dictate, or parents to dictate, just higher age children to dictate who it is they are biologically, which subverts the entire premise of natural law.
I'd like to make a controversial point and try to squeeze some frames together to bring to bear an understanding on the situation, so people will do something about it. If you don't take ownership over your children, the state will. Right? They're your property, and for you to steward forward, or they're for someone else to do it. If you want to relinquish that to the state, it is something that denotes you unfit in a core competence, which is to steward a child into maturity, so that we can educate them at some scale to do something specialized. so that their underlying skills don't undermine all of the capital that we bring to bear.
And with this whole restructuring, or I don't even want to call it restructuring, but exposure of the administrative state with the monies that have been going and then being slushed around in a laundering machine and then sent to whoever and whatever, and not being properly put in the right place. What do you see happening to the educational system? Because going back to your point, like a lot of adults are tacitly agreeing or simply agreeing to allow the state to be the parents of their children. So when this administrative state inevitably breaks down because of the absolute total corruption that's being exposed, I mean, what do you see taking its place? How do you see this playing out?
Let me abuse some terminology. I want people to understand legitimacy and laundering. Laundering is the making legitimate of money, meaning a business launders money. That's what a business does. It legitimizes the exchanges, and you report them to the government, right? And then you can get taxed on them, and you can assume profit, and everybody moves forward without contention with one another. So all businesses technically launder money. They clean it of its criminality. That's why banks that launder money we go after so hard, which like a TD Bank did recently. They laundered money for the cartels or something. So legitimacy in property and the creation of relation only requires reciprocity between two agents. You and I have a relational capital with one another. We can spend it down or we can build it up. Right? If I lie to you, I burn it down. Right? If I betray you, I burn all the capital I put into you out, because it's hard to get back from 0 back to 1. Right? We have trust. We either lose it or we don't. So most social capitals work more like that than they do like money. And we use money now to scab over the fact that we're spending down all of our other demonstrated interests to accrue returns on something that's fabricated. And what's happening with that fabricated money is that it's siphoning its way up to the smallest amount of hands possible, because that's what happens in any value distribution, which is why we need to distribute our value across capitals so that you equilibrate between a bunch of capitals, not just one. So it never suffers the Pareto distribution fault of spiraling out of control, which is what we're getting with money currently, which is what we're getting with currency currently, because it's not grounded in anything that's real.
Right. It's completely fake, manipulated illusion.
Since COVID, like a very small percent of it is even legitimate anymore. If I could, there's not enough time in the world to parse the nuance precisely of every crime that's taken place before the present moment right now. Right? We don't have enough time moving forward into the future to parse that down to the very penny at every turn. What we need to do is issue a new understanding across these capitals. Tell people that they have acted poorly, in sin, criminally, if necessary. Most people will just take the cultural shift as is because it's as large as it can possibly be, and you're going to be delivered European standards of living in America anyway. The trends that you have that are going to work out in the world demographically and economically, whether we ameliorate for the harms or we don't, are still require a cognitive understanding in economics, where you begin to realize that you can't just consume at your leisure and pleasure here and expect it to get better.
Well, I think those days are completely over. They've been overspent. They're done. I think the currency now is who's bringing productive, truthful solutions to the table versus just this bogus lies and chasing after a carrot that's not actually even a real carrot.
So this
with
is
the current monetary system.
this is where I brag on mine and my's behalf. I, as far as I can tell, and I just speak English, so as far as I can tell, have collected all of the most important educators that exist on planet Earth presently. They retool fundamental paradigms and afford people a perception that differs from the one they have now. It affords them to see the capitals that they spend down willingly. A good example of it is how frequently women will choose whoring over anything else. Because if you let people choose their identities, they will choose the cheapest one. It takes a lot to build people up. It takes a lot to have capital enough for people to strive for something heroic. And we will lose I tell people we're losing the genetic foundations for that behavior. We're on the verge of extinguishing heroism during the COVID era. We put masks on children and told them they were doing good, that they were saving people. You can't be a hero and be passive. Right? That's an inversion of our culture. That's a crime that can't be expressed in words. No one who founded countries would ever think that that's a thing we would do. Not Western countries. We don't do that to children, but we did it here.
We did it here to such a just irrational degree. I mean, it was beyond belief, just like you talked about in that video. It is beyond belief. And it's it's been tough just even associating with individuals who think this is somewhat okay. I mean, I can go into a conversation for 30 seconds to a minute and figure out whether or not the individual was part of the masking the children.
Yes,
and you must do your part of society the past 4 years.
Well, here's no one. The average human isn't fit for that much pressure. I mean, we shouldn't get as much information as we're getting. We shouldn't be pushed into the information streams that we're pushed into. We shouldn't be afforded access to the economic scale we're afforded access to. We shouldn't be afforded the broadcast ability across all markets, across all peoples, all at once. Like, those are things that should be off limits for most people. Those are actions at scale that you should earn by demonstrated competence, not that you should be gifted because you turned some arbitrary number. You have to prove fitness to enter into any market space. And we've made market spaces universal and invited children. All you're going to get is predation. All you're going to get is chaos.
Well, and it's been induced by a psychological manipulation and funding by the own by the governments as well, by this fake and illusionary monetary.
It is fake. They bought this delusion, right?
Completely.
They bought the culture. They broadcasted the delusion. They paid for all the academics, right? They kept the hubs of information. They filtered the media landscape. Right? That's a lot of effort. All that money, all the debt went into that operation. That's what we spent it on. Now, the problem is the externality here is that real people got caught up in it because it's beyond most people's perception and always will be. Because you can't expect people to see something that spans across peoples, across nations, across narratives, and across incentives.
Right, because there's this false sense of a reality. And in order to jump out of that false sense of the reality of this world belief, of this irrational reality that they find themselves in, you literally have to turn it on its head and start just completely, I don't even know what to call that. What would you call, somebody who, an awakening? I call it God-given discernment. I call it submitting yourself to a discernment that's outside of your human capability and tapping into God-given discernment. And when you're doing that, you're allowed to see. you're made able to see and given the strength to see and given the digestibility to be able to navigate that expanse, because it is so expansive, because it has been funded so heavily to create this false sense of reality.
We've spent our time attempting to include people into a model that discluding them from, or excluding them from, or sheltering them from serves them better, right? There's a reason why we didn't let children do things. There's a reason why we didn't put men and women in the same service arenas. Well, there's more reasons for separating them than there are for putting them together. I want people to understand that it's in servicing those around you that you're going to find meaning in life for the most part, in servicing your own around you. And the way we specialize here in order to produce the future is we couple up and we create children. What we do with children is preserve their innocence. We've made an error in extending childhood, which is affording people childish behavior sets in mature reality space, right? We let people act like children, and that is the error, because bad and evil people hide in the frivolity. Oh, well, they want that. Well, we don't let children have things that are bad for them, whether they want them or not. That's what governance is for. To govern is to put a limit on, right? And we push most things. Here, we are fit to govern ourselves. In America, we get to stand on our high horse. We are sovereigns and fit to govern ourselves. The court manages disputes between us. But most of us are not fit for the sovereignty granted in the founding documents of this place, because our actions don't included, right? Videos at hand included. These are stewards of our social fabric. We talk a lot about it. People talk a lot about the social fabric, but none of them are laying in it.
Well, they're not laying in it because they're offloading their unalienable individual responsibility to somebody else, thinking they're going to solve their problems. And in this beautiful form of government that we have, it's a republic if you can keep it, meaning you need to educate yourself on individual unalienable rights, what that means and how that ties to natural law, how that ties to the fundamental principles of the contract, the social contract, in which is the Constitution, your state constitutions, which creates the form of government, and then the central Constitution, the constitutional compact, which binds those states together. But going back to what the discussion you had with the public servant that was firing you publicly on recorded Zoom meetings, clearly he is not fit to be there because he's just acting as a grown child. He's not understanding that his rules, his regulations of his school, they cannot trump the supreme law. They can't trump natural law, just like the mayor of Newburyport, Massachusetts, who decides to fly a foreign belligerent ideological trans flag on publicly owned property. You're not that no. You can't. That's complete belligerence towards everything that is reality. Mm-hmm. And they want to live and then psychologically operate, literally psychologically operate by raising a flag on publicly owned property for their collective politic in that area to make it seem like this is reality, make it seem like this is okay, when reality is that's a complete and utter belligerence to natural law. That's a complete utter belligerence to the Constitution, in which this individual also took an oath to support and defend against enemies, foreign and domestic. Now, in the last few moments, Brandon, before I let you go, mm-hmm. Where can people find you?
Yep.
and a little bit about the Institute. What can people tap into over there?
Let me wrap up with the foundations. You started with irreciprocities, right? We teach people to equilibrate across all capitals, right? Come to some harmonious stability in your present all the time. It's only from that stability that you can act in a good fashion. I'm under the impression that right now you can only demonstrate being good in the face of malincentives and people trying to get you to do something that's wrong, like put a mask on a child. Reciprocity. We have distilled the law, the natural law, the law of retaliation between humans down to the principle of reciprocity, and broken that principle down into 5 criteria: productive, fully informed, warranted, voluntary, and free from costs upon the demonstrated interests of others. If your language is the church or Christianity, then you can look at it as a recursive checklist for trespass. It works the same way. Where there are irreciprocities, one of those criteria is being violated. In the case of the pandemic, like being fully informed about what you were putting in your body or on your face, that was clear. No one was fully informed about what was going on. They were being coerced. So any breach of any of those criteria at any time in any interaction denotes irreciprocity, something that needs to be equilibrated for, something that needs to be rectified, something that needs to be restituted, some information that needs to be inserted and made apparent for both parties that exists somewhere, and it needs to be fixed. And until it is fixed, you will accrue debts against this place, violent retaliatory debts, because that's what natural law is, when nature will retaliate against you. Now, we are experts in its expression as human nature, as in humans' retaliation against you, given their incentives landscape, but it exists all the way down to and through nature proper, down to physics and what would you call it? The quantum field, right? Under whatever underlies physics, right? It's a steady. It's the same evolutionary computation, stable states without retaliation between agents. So how you find us is easy. The naturallawinstitute.com or .org. Our fellows are across the social arena. They are also easy to find on both of the websites. I encourage strongly that people get involved in any way that they can. We are tangentially involved in most efforts to rectify the wrongs of the past. Most specifically, the most recent past, because it's the easiest to re-equilibrate for. The faster you get to an irreciprocity, the easier it is to fix it. Same in the dog training world. If you don't let the behavior escalate and you catch the escalation early, right, when the body stiffens up right before an attack or something similar. If you get the correction in when the body stiffens up instead of on the explosion, you get to give less of a correction. Amen. With the same cognitive efficacy and the same stifling power.
Good stuff, brother. Well, I appreciate it. For the audience, appreciate Brandon coming on here. Brandon, you can be found at Through the Haze on X. Again, thank you. God bless you for coming on. And the audience, I'm going to leave you with a clip of Brandon. But before I do, check out freedomfinancial1776.com. Do your own research. Figure out some of this new technology coming online for the financial system. Head over to ff1776.com or freedomfighter1776.com. And you'll get some more resources over there as well. And God bless. Much love. Like I said, check out this clip from Brandon and we'll end the show.
As being in an administrative position inside of a hierarchical system. However, when that system does something unlawful or something dangerous to the children, it is up to the adults to stand up and say that this is wrong. The children in your school district, they will go to school with masks gladly because they want to socialize with their children, with other children and their friends, and they want to participate in what will be society in the future. And to hold that participating with your friends is a reward. So you're giving them a reward for the compliance of wearing masks. It's nefariously Pavlovian. So as a person in your position, you should take the opportunity to remove the necessity for masks district-wide, especially for the elementary school kids, regardless of what school committees or the state thinks. On top of that, I'm not foreign to the laws and mandates that have been pushed forth during this pandemic, which is now an endemic, not a pandemic anymore. And Massachusetts is going to lift outdoor mask bans in 2 days. Now, I don't see the reason for waiting 2 or 3 days before you allow for the removal of some constraint that was unconstitutional in the first place, but that is what's going on. I don't see any reason why the majority of the parents in the area wouldn't back you for the removal of mask mandates, especially given the most recent science, the new study released by MIT stating that it doesn't matter 6 feet, 60 feet indoors, there's no difference in transmission. And that's all on top of children not being the group worried about for getting the virus in the first place. This is a state charade. This is an authoritative heist, and it's happening from the